This is the story of St. Nicholas, his life, legends, and interpretations prepared for Christmas from my collection, Will Rivinus. This is a collection that has been underway for a mere 45 years, collecting everything I could get my hands on. The collection consists of 200 books, manuscripts, icons, cards, and various objects that I have prepared. Some of the pictures that you will be seeing are from Christmas cards that I personally prepared in this series of years, 1965 to 1982. A mere 17 years, creating different images and different cards for each year. It's probably important to understand the significance of St. Nicholas. It is said that he was born in the year 280 AD and lived to 345 AD. Whether he actually lived or not is a question, but for our purposes, we will continue to admire Nicholas for a number of reasons. The first is that his legend has lasted 1,700 years. He is a saint and has been revered in the Christian church, but he was not a martyr, as most of the early saints were. He lived a reasonable life, did lots of good works. There is a record of perhaps as many as 80 miracles and events that he's done in his lifetime, and he was the most popular saint in Europe. Reported in the 1930s, there were 1,200 different sites dedicated to St. Nicholas. But perhaps the most intriguing part is that he was a very popular secular individual in America, as we will see as we go along. Here's a comparison of the saint on the left-hand side and Santa Claus, as we think of him, on the right-hand side. This is part of a Christmas booklet that my sister, Bet Layden, and I created in 1965. And it shows how the saint migrated into the Santa Claus that we know today. Here's a map which will help to set the stage. On the right-hand side, you see the town of Myra, where St. Nicholas is said to have been born and lived his life, became a bishop, and ultimately died peacefully in the region also called Patara in Turkey. Off to the right-hand side, there is the city of Jerusalem. Above is the town of Nicaea, with Byzantium right above it. On the left, toward the center, is Athens, and off to the left is the town of Bari in the heel of Italy, where St. Nicholas's bones finally resided. This is an icon in the Orthodox Christian Church showing St. Nicholas. It is called a Vita icon because it shows scenes of his life all around the outside. This is from the 13th century. Here is the image of St. Nicholas dropping bags of gold for 3 unwed maidens, one of the most popular stories related to Nicholas. These particular images were created by my sister Bet and have been used on various Christmases the years since 1965. This is the second most popular miracle attributed to Nicholas. 3 young boys went off to school some distance away. They had to stay overnight at an inn. During the night, the innkeeper murdered all 3, cut them up with the idea of serving their parts to visiting travelers in the future. St. Nicholas came along shortly thereafter, discovered the crime, and restored the small boys back to life again. This is another of the famous miracles of Nicholas. Not only did he calm the seas, but he restored to life a sailor who fell out of the rigging, and we will see this picture again, but this is my sister's interpretation. This is the story of St. Nicholas as patron of thieves. The miracle story, of course, relates to the thief who stole money. St. Nicholas spotted him and persuaded him to give back the gold that he had stolen. These are the pictures that my sister created, and they're the easiest to understand the images. These supposedly are the bones of St. Nicholas, which were to be found in the town of Myra. The bones are now in the Antalya Museum, which is only a few miles away. Whether they are to be identified by DNA, we'll never know. This is the Church of St. Nicholas. The older part is near us, built in the 6th century. This is the interior of the church as it is today. It is, however, a pilgrimage site and very popular in Myra. So popular is Nicholas that the town citizens have erected this statue in the center square, showing Nicholas as we would imagine him in America, but they have taken the image back to their country, Turkey, and I saw this in 2007 when I visited. This is a National Geographic map of the area involved. You'll notice in the lower right-hand corner of Turkey, the town of Myra, and then directly above it is Istanbul or Constantinople. We look across to the boot of Italy and see that Bari is just at the heel or at the ankle. Above that is Venice. All of these played an important part, and one bit of history to understand why Nicholas became famous in the 11th century. First, there was the break in the church between the Western Christian church with Rome and the Eastern church in Istanbul. In the same period, in 1071, the Seljuk Turks took over Jerusalem, and the Crusades started yet later in the same century. It became important then for the people of Europe to go on the Crusades to Jerusalem, and they either had the choice of walking down the length of Italy to Bari and taking the boat over it, or getting in the boat at Venice and taking a boat over it. But pilgrimages became important when some of the sailors on the way back from Jerusalem picked up or liberated or otherwise stole the bones of St. Nicholas and brought them to the town of Bari in the heel of Italy. The bones of St. Nicholas came to the town of Bari in southern Italy in 1087 AD, and thereafter became a major pilgrimage site of Europe. We will then go in to see the face of the church, not terribly distinguished, but this is where the veneration of St. Nicholas now is centered. Here is an icon in the church of St. Nicholas in Bari. Perhaps not the most captivating, but nevertheless, this is one of the images that they admire. The stories of St. Nicholas were collected primarily in the 9th century AD. This is a fascinating text by Methodius, who was the archpatriarch in Istanbul, in Constantinople, in the year 845 AD, and it's perhaps the most complete early record presenting the life of Nicholas. This is also intriguing. This is the life of St. Nicholas the Bishop from the Golden Legend. The Golden Legend was one of the most popular books in the Middle Ages. This particular story was written in the 13th century, reproduced during the 19th century by William Caxton, a printer, and translated by him in England, and then turned into a booklet such as we see. This is the actual printing of the Golden Legend, which was done by William Morris, a medieval aficionado and craftsman in the 19th century. This is actually reproduced by me out of a copy at the New York Public Library. Here is a reproduction of The Hours of the Duc de Berry, which is a book at the cloisters in New York. The picture was rendered about 1410. And here is another picture of St. Nicholas performing miracles at sea by Giovanni de Paolo in 1450. Finally, here is an image of the three boys followed by the three girls. Here is a story of St. Nicholas visiting a small character in Holland. Notice that he is accompanied by Schwarz Peter, Black Peter, which was a perfectly popular theme in Holland when Nicholas was their patron saint. And this shows Nicholas scattering gifts among the children of Holland. Nicholas came to America in about 1630s, 1640s with the Dutch settling on the island of Manhattan. This is what the town looked like in the year 1640. We should understand that at that point, Nicholas was the patron saint of the Netherlands, Holland, whereas as the English would come to the Americas in the 1660s, 1670s, they were coming out of Oliver Cromwell's England, where he had abolished all recognition of churches and saints in the 1650s. The English dropped their devotion to St. Nicholas, such as they had, and adopted Father Christmas, using the date of December 25th to give presents to children, whereas St. Nicholas Day was December 6th. This is perhaps one of the first really American images done by a man named Alexander Anderson in the year 1810. This was presented to the members of the New York Historical Society as it was forming. This is the broadside, as it was called, that was enclosed in the folder. And this is his version of St. Nicholas on the left-hand side, with obviously the very good girls with filled stockings and the very bad boys carrying a switch. This was the first presentation. The next, in 1809, was a book by Washington Irving, who became the most popular writer in America at that time. He wrote Knickerbocker's History of New York, a spoof on the early Dutch settlements of Manhattan. And here are two old Dutchmen comparing notes. Washington Irving fabricated his own story out of the stories that had been passed down to him. But some of the things that he mentioned in Knickerbocker's history involve Henry Hudson's original ship figurehead being St. Nicholas. The fact that St. Nicholas arrives over the treetops and smoking his pipe. He lays his finger against his nose, just like we envision Santa Claus. And there's also the story of stockings being stuffed. St. Nicholas helped the Dutch to take a Swedish fort with the aid of mosquitoes, according to Washington Irving. There are all kinds of wonderful stories of St. Nicholas's pipe that helped him. This is the very next significant publication relating to St. Nicholas, written by Clement Moore in the year 1822. He wrote the famous poem, "'Twas the Night Before Christmas, When All Through the House." And here it is, with a Merry Christmas note to me. This story was published in the Troy, New York Sentinel in 1823 and became very popular throughout the land. Might add that Clement Moore was a teacher of biblical studies at the Virginia Theological Seminary from 1821 to 1850. So he had an honest job, but he also had 9 children. So he wrote the story for them. Finally, in this section here is the picture by a man named Weir of St. Nicholas in 1837. We see him climbing up the chimney with his finger to his nose, all part of the traditional story. This is probably the most important person in popularizing Santa Claus in America, Thomas Nast, who lived from 1840 to 1902. He created a series of images of St. Nicholas. This is probably the most popular. He did this in 1881 for Harper's Magazine. He did a series of images for Harper's. Here's one in 1863 showing Santa Claus, also the return of soldiers from the Civil War. Nast was famous for creating images. Here's one of Santa on the top of the chimney. He did Civil War pictures in the days before photography, so this is part of that series. Thomas Nast is also famous for creating the Republican elephant, the Democratic donkey, and the Tammany, New York, tiger. These are various images that he created over the years, primarily for Harper's Weekly magazine in the days before radio and television. This was the image of Santa Claus reading mail, or the good girl and the bad boy answering to Santa. Another image of Santa coming down the chimney with the little people looking for him, waiting impatiently for the hour when Santa would come down the chimney. Santa with a series of children, perhaps sending a letter to Santa Claus at the North Pole. Santa visiting a kid asleep. A famous one, a little girl hugging Santa Claus that appeared on the cover of Harper's. Santa rising from a box, ringing the bells at Christmas time. And finally, Santa on the telephone. I don't know the date, but it has to have been the end of the series because of the date of the phone. Christmas cards became very popular in America starting in 1843. So here are some of the early images. These are different cards. These are actually postcards, a variety of different images and different interpretations of what Santa Claus ought to look like. These are specifically American because there are American flags. And this is obviously an important dated one with the car of perhaps 1910. Other images which actually came from England but show the same sort of interpretation. Here's one from Germany. And these were little books that were sent at Christmas time with stories inside of St. Nicholas or Santa Claus creating toys with reindeer to pull his sled. Norman Rockwell was perhaps as famous as any of the interpreters of Santa Claus. Here is Norman Rockwell's personal image and self-portrait. He lived from 1894 to 1978, and for 40 years he created covers for the Saturday Evening Post. Here's Santa with a little boy, Santa calculating his expenses, Santa visiting a little girl, exhausted Santa Claus figure at the end of the day, Santa Claus in a crowd at the railway station, and finally the horror of all horrors, discovering the Santa Claus suit in the bottom drawer of your father's chest of drawers. One of the most interesting pieces of the collection is a bound series of albums about a magazine called St. Nicholas. It had nothing originally to do with the saint or Santa Claus. It was a magazine for young people created during the period of 1868 to 1940. Remember, there was no radio, no television, nothing else to see. So this magazine came out bi-monthly for 72 years. Here is the cover of the book, and here are some of the stories inside. One of the more interesting ones was written by Teddy Roosevelt about American boys. There were a number of very good writers who wrote for this magazine. Alfred Tennyson, Henry Longfellow, Rudyard Kipling, Bret Harte, Jack London, Louisa May Alcott, Stephen Vincent Benet, who wrote a story at the age of 15 when he submitted it to the publication. Some of the artwork was done by Frederick Remington and Howard Pyle. This is perhaps the most topical story of Santa Claus, coming by way of dirigible in 1908. This is yet another story of the anthology, which was put out in 1948. This is a poster for St. Nicholas magazine. This would have appeared in stores where the book was sold on a newsstand, and it shows St. Nicholas being held up. As I said, St. Nicholas magazine was not necessarily or even ever much about Santa Claus or the saint. So here's a typical summer, August picture of 1896. This is a typically American image of Father Christmas rather than Santa Claus or St. Nicholas. It's derived from the English tradition. There were many images of St. Nicholas created over many years by a variety of magazines beyond the Harper's Weekly. This is just a quick scan of particular items in the collection, showing Santa Claus in his earlier versions before Thomas Nast. This is an English interpretation of Santa Claus arriving to see his friends in America. At that time, Santa Claus climbed across the world and over the roofs. Again, put his finger by his nose. Santa Claus is arriving for Christmas, with children in expectation all around the world. Wonderful children asleep. These images appeared in a variety of magazines. Father Time, Santa Claus accosting the poor postman. He's returning home at the end of his tour. Oops, Santa has a problem. Arriving, it's all the fault of the Wright brothers. Here is Santa Claus with a bulldog that appeared on the Saturday Evening Post in 1930. And here he is in Newsweek in 1970. And finally, in this section here is Santa Claus with his glove that appeared in the Better Homes and Gardens in 1994. Santa Claus was enlisted by the commercial world to promote almost anything. Here's a poster advertising boots, shoes, and hats in early 20th century. The next great creator of Santa Claus images was a man named Haddon Sundblom, a commercial artist in Chicago. He worked for the Coca-Cola Company from 1931 to 1966, a mere 35 years, creating Santa Claus for various packages of Coca-Cola and reproduced on the cans themselves. Haddon Sundblom was very, very important to Coke. Needless to say, Pepsi responded by hiring Norman Rockwell to do their image. And lest anybody else get the idea, here's a mail-order catalog by Norm Thompson in 1986, showing a different view. It didn't work, obviously. In 1976, a commercial artist in Chicago named E. Willis Jones wrote a book about Santa Claus after having created a variety of Christmas cards of his own. He did those from 1951 to 1977. And his book, the Santa Claus book, pretty well covers the imagery of Santa Claus in America. This is the book of St. Nicholas of Myra, Barry, and Manhattan, the biography of a legend written by Charles Williams Jones in 1978 at the University of Chicago. Charles Jones was a professor at the University of California in Berkeley, and it is he who recorded the 1880 miracles of St. Nicholas. I might add that the Germans were ahead of us in writing definitive histories of St. Nicholas. I would just record Gustav Anrich wrote 2 volumes in 1912, and Carl Meisen wrote a book in 1931, all about the history of the St. Nicholas cult in Europe. Those books are now almost impossible to obtain. A visit to St. Nicholas, or Santa Claus, at Macy's became a time-honored tradition starting in 1924. Here's a marvelous inside cover ad from Life magazine of 1949, showing young man talking to Santa and saying, "My daddy's been a good boy too, and he wants a Plymouth car." Charles Adams had a wonderful time with the idea of children visiting Santa Claus, and so he did the page of Santa Claus changing clothes and returning to his home in the suburbs. Another famous image of Santa is standing on the street corner ringing a bell and asking for donations for the Salvation Army, a custom that started in the 1890s and probably terminated in the 1984 when Ray and Joan Kroc, K-R-O-C, donated $1.5 billion to the Salvation Army. Needless to say, after that, they didn't need to stand on the corner soliciting small change. They had to mind their investments. The gift was made in the year 2005. Lots of people tried to get into the St. Nicholas Santa Claus tradition. On the left is a copy of a book by Frank Baum, who created The Wizard of Oz. He was immensely successful with that story, but his story of Santa Claus didn't work. The next one is of Santa Claus and the Cub, and the following one is an interview with Santa Claus by Margaret Mead, who was a noted anthropologist, head of the Museum of Natural History in New York, and has written extensively. She did an interview with Santa Claus, and it simply didn't work. People tried various games. Here is a game whereby you can fill in the sound of the word for a variety of words in 'Twas the Night Before Christmas. Santa Claus was disenfranchised, if you will, in 1969 by the authorities in Rome. They said that the Catholic Church no longer had an official day for St. Nicholas, December 6th, and that he was an optional saint. Lots of us would object to that characterization, but St. Nicholas, St. Valentine, St. Christopher were all taken off the official church calendar at that time. Needless to say, Charles Adams had an answer for the 1970 New Yorker. Santa Claus is dead. In 1897, a little girl named Virginia O'Hanlon wrote to the New York Sun and said, "Tell me, my friends question whether there is a Santa Claus. Is there really a Santa Claus?" The New York Sun wrote back, "Yes, Virginia, there is a Santa Claus. He exists as certainly as love and generosity and devotion exist, and you know that they abound, and give your life its highest beauty and joy. Alas, how dreary would be the world if there was no Santa Claus. It would be as dreary as if there were no Virginias. No Santa Claus? Thank God he lives. He lives forever. 1,000 years from now, Virginia, nay, 10 times 10,000 years from now, he will continue to make the world glad." For a number of years, I have tried to locate my collection with Catholic churches or universities or libraries, but to no effect. They all remember that the Pope said Nicholas was optional, and so they would not touch it. Then I discovered the Episcopal Church in America. In the year 2024, the collection was acquired by the Virginia Theological Seminary, where it will augment their collection that is housed in Alexandria, Virginia. So yes, Virginia, Santa Claus and St. Nicholas will last for many generations to come.